Good day, folks. It's DIY Guy 123 here. Let's talk about bearings. So the first thing you need to know about bearings is how to spell it. There's an A in bearing. What does a bearing do? It restricts motion in one plane or maybe multiple planes, and it reduces friction. The most common bearing that I run into is a tapered roller bearing that I see on trailers and on wheel bearings in cars as well. It's also known as a cone bearing because the inner part of the bearing is shaped like this in a cone shape. It's not flat, it's like that. Okay. So, what are the parts? We have the outer bearing race, and this is the part that gets pressed into a housing. And then we have rollers, and I've only got one shown here, but there would be rollers all lining the inside of this outer race. And then we have the inner race. So the way it's assembled is the outer race, the rollers, the inner race. Now, in the case of a cone bearing, you can remove this part and these rollers as a package, and they're retained. In the case of a standard regular roller bearing that's not a cone shaped, you can't take these parts apart. They're all pressed into one, and only when they're destroyed do they come apart. So outer race, rollers, inner race. The outer race on a cone bearing is also called the cup because the inner surface of it is tapered like this, and the cone bearings are tapered like this, and they go together, and they call that the cup. Now, this is the bearing, and what happens? A shaft gets installed in the bearing. Now, if you have a regular roller bearing, it can control movement in this direction. It will stop that. But in this case, a cone bearing, if this is the thin part of the race and that is the thick part, that means it restricts movement in this direction. It will stop that movement as well. So if you have a shaft with a collar on it like this and you slide it into the bearing will put a force on the outer edge of that collar like that. And it will also put a force like this and like this and like that and on the backside as well and maintain that shaft. Now, because a cone bearing can retain force or apply a force in only one direction, you need to have opposite or opposing cone bearings on a trailer, and that'll keep the wheel from moving. So when you assemble it, it looks like this right here. We have the outer race, we have the rollers, and we have the inner race. Let's take a look at what they look like on the workbench. Here's that outer race, otherwise known as a cup, and you'll see right here there's a thin edge, and back here there's a thicker edge. And that means that it's shaped so that the inner cone bearing slides in, and basically the bearing balls push outward against that outer race. Here's the inner race without any rollers on it. And you'll see it does have an angle to it. And right above my thumb, you can see the angle to it. And so this inner race drops in the outer race like that. These are the tapered rollers. And they came out of a bearing that I changed because it had basically blown up. And here's that retainer that I talked about. This is what it looks like when you have an inner race, a retainer holding the rollers in place. The only other component is a grease seal that's on the inside of the hub, and it keeps grease in when you pump it in from the outside of the hub. So those are the parts of a bearing. Good luck with your do-it-yourself projects.